Hey guys, before we start, please don't forget to subscribe and leave a comment if you have any feedback. Let's go to the story. I-29F learned my entire family had been using me for years because my sister but dialed me while they were trash-talking me at dinner. And they didn't just talk. They laughed, mocked, listed the ways I could keep funding their lives without ever having to say thank you. It's been months since it happened, but I still remember exactly where I was, what I was wearing, and how the air in my lungs felt like it didn't belong to me when I heard it. Let me back up a bit. I live in Lakewood, Colorado, now just outside Denver. Moved into a small place by myself last year. Nothing fancy. Just clean, quiet, mine. I work nights as a surgical tech. It's unglamorous and exhausting, and half the time, I come home with someone else's blood on my shoes. But it pays well. Well enough to take care of myself. And, for longer than I care to admit, other people too. Those other people are my mother Diane, my younger sister Harper, and my brother Nolan. They've never been independent. Not in the real sense. Harper's bounced from job to job, always blaming her boss for toxic vibes, while living rent-free in Diane's house. Nolan is technically employed, but most of his paychecks go toward video games and vape cartridges. Diane, for her part, has leaned hard into the "my kids owe me everything" phase of her life. Growing up, I was the fixer, the responsible one. The girl who did her homework, got a job at 16, didn't date until college, and still called home every Sunday even when no one picked up. They praised me for it. Said they were proud of how I held everything together. I didn't realize they meant that literally. For years, I've been paying their bills. Not all of them, but more than I should have. Rent when they fell behind. Groceries when Harper accidentally overdraft. Nolan's car insurance after a surprise ticket. I even helped Diane cover a medical expense last year. That surprise turned out to be a cosmetic treatment she didn't want to admit to. They always had excuses. And I always caved. Because guilt, when planted early enough, grows into something that wraps around your throat and calls itself loyalty. I'd just gotten home from a long shift the night it happened. My feet were throbbing. My lower back felt like it had been jackhammered. I dropped my bag by the door and collapsed onto the couch without even taking off my shoes. That's when my phone rang. It was Harper. Late. Which was weird. She usually only texted when she needed something, like a quick Venmo for takeout or help deciphering a letter from the bank she never opened on time. I picked up, expecting some new crisis. But there was no voice on the other end, just background noise. Laughter. Silverware. Wine glasses clink. It took me a moment to realize it was a group dinner. Some kind of family meal. I hadn't been invited. That part didn't sting, not anymore. They stopped including me in things months ago, ever since I moved out and stopped playing emotional babysitter. I was about to hang up when I heard my name. And not just in passing. They were talking about me. Loudly. Casually. Like I wasn't even a person. Like I was some concept they dissected 100 times and now had a formula. I sat there frozen, phone to my ear, listening as my own mother chuckled about how useful I'd become. There was no kindness in their voices. Just a calculation. Commentary. Quiet delight in the idea that I'd always come through for them because I was too afraid not to. That was the moment everything changed. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't even hang up. I just sat there, heart hollowing out in slow motion, realizing that for them. I was never family. I was a wallet with a heartbeat. I don't know how long I sat there, phone pressed to my ear like it was part of me, listening to the people I used to call home pick me apart like I was a budget line item. At some point, the audio shifted. Plates were being cleared. Someone moved closer to the phone, probably Harper, maybe checking her messages without realizing she'd called me. But her voice stayed live. The line never disconnected. And what I heard next made the first part feel almost forgivable. They weren't just using me. They were planning how to use me more. It started with Diane. She was rattling off a list of expenses like she was tallying grocery coupons. Not because they were short on money, because they assumed I'd pay. She just got another bonus, right? She said. We should ask about getting the fridge replaced. That old thing's about to die anyway. Nolan chimed in, casual as ever. Might as well throw in the AC unit while she's at it. She's not broke. And if she is, she'll never tell us. That line hit different. It wasn't just cruel, it was calculated. They knew I wouldn't speak up. Knew I'd eat the cost and smile because that's what I'd always done. And now they were passing that down like an inherited trait. Mocking the same generosity they fed off of. Then came Harper, the golden child of passive aggression. We should ask for a little more each month. she said, like she was talking about increasing a streaming subscription. I mean, if she's going to act like our third parent, she might as well pay like one. Laughter. Forks clinking. Someone poured another drink. And I just sat there, listening to my own family discuss how to squeeze more money from me without having to say thank you, or even ask. They weren't debating whether it was okay. They were already past that. They were just debating how much they could get. That's when I started writing things down. At first, it was automatic. A defense mechanism. My mind needed something physical to do, something to ground me while the world tilted. I grabbed a notepad off the coffee table and started listing every payment I'd made in the past year. Rent for Diane, $850 per month times 8. Harper's emergency vet bill, $600. Nolan's car insurance, $300. Grocery delivery gift cards, $1, $200 total. New tires for Diane's car, $400. Birthday gifts that were basically cash, hundreds of dollars more. It added up faster than I expected. And with every scribbled number, the shame lifted just a little. Because seeing it in black and white, that was the moment it stopped being my fault. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't too sensitive. I was being used, systematically, unapologetically, and with zero intention from any of them to ever give something back. And they never would. Not because they couldn't. Because they didn't have to. I had made it easy. And now, I was going to make it stop. Not with some dramatic blow-up. Not with screaming voicemails or teary goodbyes. No, I was going to do it my way. Quietly. Strategically. And by the time they realized what had changed, the door would already be locked behind them. There's something incredibly underrated about going silent. Not ghosting. Not passive aggression. Just withdrawal. A calm, measured retreat where you stop feeding the machine and watch what it does without fuel. That's what I did next. The morning after Harper's accidental call, I woke up with a kind of clarity I hadn't felt in years. Not peace. Not yet. But purpose. And that was enough. I didn't send a text. Didn't mention the call. Didn't give them a chance to backpedal or spin it as a misunderstanding. Because I already knew what would happen. They'd lie. They'd cry. They'd say I was misinterpreting their words, that it was a joke, that I was overreacting. And for once in my life, I didn't care to hear the apology. I just wanted out. The first step was financial. I opened every account I'd ever connected to any of them. Subscriptions, bill pay, Venmo, automatic transfers, anything with my name on it. I took screenshots and then started shutting things down. First to go, the rent transfer I sent Diane every month. I logged in, hit cancel recurring payment, and stared at the confirmation for a long time. My thumb hovered over the screen like I was cutting a cord between me and gravity. Then I pressed it. Gone. The phone plan came next. We'd been on a shared family plan for years. It was cheap, convenient, but also another leash I hadn't noticed around my neck until I felt it loosen. I called the carrier, transferred Diane, Harper, and Nolan off my account, paid off the remaining balance on all their devices, because I knew they'd use the debt as leverage if I didn't. It was the most expensive goodbye I've ever funded, but it was also the last. Once the bills were off my back, I changed my direct deposit. I'd been using a joint savings account for years, one that Diane technically had access to, just in case of emergencies. I moved everything into a new bank. New routing number. New passwords. Nothing flashy. Just surgical cuts. Precise. Clean. And still, no one noticed. Not immediately. The silence was eerie. I thought maybe they knew. Maybe Harper checked her bank and saw the missing deposit. Maybe Diane opened the fridge and realized there wouldn't be a restock this week. But no one reached out. Not until 4 days later. Diane texted first. Something short. Breezy. Hey, do you know why the rent didn't go through this month? No question mark. No warmth. Just expectation. I didn't answer. An hour later, Harper. The phone's acting weird. Is the account down? Then Nolan. Of course, the blunt one. Did you cancel our stuff? I put my phone face down. Let them wonder. That night, I made dinner. Actual dinner, not microwave garbage. Sat at my kitchen table with a real plate, soft music in the background, and no buzzing notifications begging for a favor. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel guilty for not being someone's backup plan. I just felt free. But I knew the silence wouldn't last. They weren't going to take this quietly. By day 5, the silence snapped. And when it did, it wasn't a gentle knock at the door. It was a battering ram. It started with Harper. She didn't ease into it. just went full tilt like the moment the money stopped. Her concern for appearances did too. Her text came in at 7:04 a.m. like she'd woken up angry. Or maybe never went to sleep at all. So are you ghosting your family now? That's who you are. I stared at the screen, chewing dry cereal and debating whether it was even worth reading the rest. She followed it up with a paragraph, so long it came through in chunks. Accusations disguised as concern. Passive aggression laced with fake sympathy. How I was being cold. How Diane was worried sick. How I should have talked to them if I had a problem instead of cutting them off like a selfish brat with a savior complex. That last line hit me like a slap, and not for the reason she probably thought. Because for years, that's exactly who I'd been. The savior. The fixer. The one who showed up, again and again, no matter how much it cost me, financially, emotionally, and mentally. And now that I wasn't, now, I was the enemy. I didn't respond. I didn't even type a single word. Later that day, Nolan chimed in. His message was simpler. Blunt. 2 sentences. You know Mom can't cover rent on her own. Hope you're okay watching her get evicted. I didn't need to read between the lines. That wasn't a plea. It was a threat. The manipulation was no longer subtle. No more guilt-tripping in soft tones. This was raw, open entitlement. As if I was legally and morally obligated to finance their poor decisions because I happened to be born first and responsible. But I didn't cave. Instead, I blocked Nolan's number. A small thing, maybe, but it felt seismic. Then came Diane. She didn't text. She called. 5 times in 1 hour. When I didn't pick up, she left a voicemail. I didn't want to listen, but part of me needed to hear just how far she'd go. Her voice was brittle. Not sad, angry. Like I'd embarrassed her. Like I'd broken some unspoken rule that the family relies on the strong one to suffer quietly and carry the load without complaint. She didn't ask how I was. Didn't ask why I pulled back. She just launched into a list of what had gone wrong in the last week. Unpaid bills, missed appointments, arguments in the house. Your silence is hurting people. That was the line that stuck with me, because it said everything. In her mind, my absence was the problem, not their behavior. Not the years of using me like a backup income stream. Not the cruel things they said when they thought I wasn't listening. It was me choosing to stop playing the game. That's what hurt them. And for the first time, I realized, really understood, that no amount of support, money, or love I gave would ever be enough. Because they didn't want a sister or a daughter. They wanted a resource. And when does a resource stop flowing? You replace it. Or, if you can't, you punish it. I waited 2 more days before responding. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because I wanted to be sure I'd say it without shaking. That morning, I made coffee slowly, stared out my window as the neighborhood came to life. Dogs being walked, garbage trucks rumbling by, neighbors starting their routines. It was the first time in weeks I'd felt truly still. Then I sat down, opened my messages, and started typing. Not with anger, not with sadness, but with a level of clarity I hadn't known I was capable of. I kept it short. No emotional explanations. No bullet points of betrayal. No reference to that accidental call, because deep down, I knew they didn't even feel guilty about it. They hadn't once said sorry, not even as a lie, so I didn't bother inviting one. Instead, I wrote this. I've spent years giving more than I should have. Time, money, energy, silence. I'm done. I'm not angry. I'm not bitter. But I am done being used. Whatever consequences you're dealing with now are not mine to fix. Please respect my boundary. And I sent it. To all 3 of them. Blocked each number immediately after. Not to be cruel. To be free. Because I knew what would happen next. The flailing. The sudden flood of fake remorse. The calls from mutual friends. The, "we're just worried about you" emails. And I didn't want to be anywhere near it. I thought maybe, it would take them a while to react. But I underestimated just how quickly people lash out when their favorite enabler stops enabling. By that evening, my aunt had messaged me. Then my cousin. Both on Diane's side. Both offering their unsolicited takes. You know your mom's not perfect, but she did her best. It's family. You don't just walk away from family. One even suggested that I must be going through something to act so selfishly. Selfish. For choosing not to fund 3 grown adults who openly mocked me while I was working 60-hour weeks and paying bills they couldn't be bothered to remember. I didn't respond to them either. Because what no one tells you is that cutting off toxic family doesn't just upset the people you cut off. It exposes everyone who benefited from your silence. and they will rush to restore the narrative. Not to protect you, to protect the ecosystem that your pain made comfortable. That night, I deleted the group chat we used to use for birthdays and holidays. I took down the last few photos in my hallway, smiling faces I once thought were connected to me by love. Turns out it was just proximity and convenience. But that emptiness on the wall, I didn't feel sad. It felt honest. 3 months went by without a word from any of them. Not a text, not a call, not even one of Diane's fake nice Facebook messages she used to send when she wanted something, but wanted to pretend it was about checking in. At first, the silence felt like standing on a frozen lake. Beautiful, but terrifying. Every step forward felt uncertain, like at any moment, they'd come crashing back in, dragging me under with them. But they didn't. And that silence? It eventually became peace. I filled my time with things I'd forgotten I loved. Long walks in the morning before work. Cooking actual meals for myself instead of grabbing takeout to eat in my car between shifts. I repainted the living room. Donated half the junk I'd accumulated out of obligation. There was a lightness to everything, like the air in my apartment had changed now that I wasn't constantly bracing for the next guilt trip. And then one evening, something strange happened. I got a message request on Instagram. The name was familiar, but I had to blink twice to place it. Bree, my cousin on my father's side. We weren't close, not because of any bad blood, but because she'd moved out of state years ago, stayed out of the family chaos, stayed quiet. Until now. Her message was short. Hey, I know we haven't talked in a while, but I think you deserve to know something. I didn't respond right away. I stared at the screen for a long time, unsure if I had it in me to dig up more rot from that garden I'd already abandoned. But curiosity won. I opened the message. What followed was a stream of screenshots, group chats, emails, snippets of conversations between Bree and my family that she'd kept buried until she couldn't anymore. Turns out that Diane had been reaching out to anyone remotely connected to me, telling them I was having a breakdown, that I'd become paranoid, that I'd cut the family off because of some silly misunderstanding and was now isolated and unstable. Harper had joined in, told people I was spiraling, that I was probably seeing a therapist who filled my head with lies. Nolan. He joked that I was probably off in a cabin somewhere knitting resentment sweaters. I should have felt furious, but I didn't. I just felt validated. Because there it was, confirmation that cutting them off wasn't harsh. It was correct. The second I stopped pouring into them, they didn't try to repair anything. They tried to rewrite the story. And the only villain they could come up with was me. Bree ended her message with this. I always thought something was off with how they talked about you. I should have said something sooner. I'm sorry I didn't. But I'm proud of you. Really proud. I sat with that for a long time. Because it was the first time in years that someone from that side of my life had said they were proud of me for protecting myself, instead of shaming me for making them uncomfortable. I thanked her. Then, I archived the screenshots. Not to hold a grudge, but to remind myself that the story they told about me wasn't my story. Not anymore. There's something almost sacred about rebuilding a life that no one else gets to control. It doesn't look dramatic. It's not a montage of wild haircuts and train rides across Europe. It's quiet. Gentle. It's clearing out a drawer you forgot was full of things that made you feel small. It's sleeping in on your day off without guilt gnawing at the back of your brain. It's cooking for yourself, not because you have to, but because it feels good to be full. That's what the next few months became. Not healing. Claiming. Claiming time. Energy. Space. Things I hadn't realized I'd given away in pieces until there was barely anything left for me. I didn't tell anyone about the screenshots Bree sent me. Didn't post anything. Didn't reach out to distant relatives or try to explain myself to people who'd already made up their minds. The old me would have written long messages, desperate to be understood, to justify, to make my absence palatable. But now, I didn't need to be palatable. I just needed to be free. I started a new routine. Morning walks turned into a casual jogging habit. My Spotify playlist went from moody background noise to stuff that made me feel like moving. I picked up a side project, nothing major, just a bit of freelance writing that let me pour all the thoughts that used to eat me alive onto the page. One day, I looked around my apartment and realized it felt like mine for the first time. Not just a place to crash between shifts or a hideout from family drama, but a space I could exhale in. The nightmares stopped. The ones where I was back in Diane's house, being screamed at for spending too much on groceries or not giving enough notice before visiting. The ones where I tried to speak, and no sound came out. I stopped flinching when my phone buzzed. Stopped checking my voicemail with a pit in my stomach. Stopped expecting chaos. It was subtle but profound. Peace is boring. But when you've lived in survival mode long enough, boring is revolutionary. I even started dating again, not seriously, just meeting people, learning how to be in a conversation without bracing for the moment I'd need to shrink. For years, I thought I had trust issues. But now I know I didn't have trouble trusting others. I had trouble believing I deserved better. Turns out I do. And I don't have to prove that to anyone. Not to Harper. Not to Nolan. Not to Diane. Not even to myself anymore. Because every single day I wake up in a life where no one is taking from me, that's the proof. It came out of nowhere. A simple email. No subject line. No greeting. Just a name in my inbox I hadn't seen in nearly 8 months. Diane. I stared at it for a while, my heart oddly calm. There was no jolt of panic, no flare of anger. Just a kind of distant curiosity, like spotting a rusted-out mailbox from the house you used to live in. Eventually, I opened it. The message was short. Maybe a paragraph and a half. No apology. No acknowledgement of the last year. Just a warm, calculated tone that made my stomach turn. Hi, honey. I know it's been a while, but I was thinking of having everyone over for a fall dinner, just the family. It would mean a lot if you came. I think enough time has passed. We can put everything behind us and move forward. There it was. The rebrand. The revisionist history. No mention of the years they drained me. No mention of the things I overheard. No apology for the lies they spread after I cut them off. Just a vague invitation to move forward, like this was some minor tiff between emotionally stable adults. I didn't reply. Not immediately. Not because I was torn, but because I wanted to sit with that feeling. The feeling of not owing anyone anything. No urgency. No pressure. Just choose. And I chose to close the email. The next morning, I went on my usual walk. Chilly air, golden leaves, the smell of wood smoke curling up from distant chimneys. There was a coffee shop on the corner I'd started going to once a week. Familiar faces. Kind baristas who remembered my name. A spot by the window where I always sat with a book and lost track of time. That's where I went. I ordered a maple latte. Sat down with my journal. On the very last page, I wrote. I didn't burn the bridge. I just stopped carrying people who refused to walk across it. Then, I closed the journal. That was it. No dramatic confrontation. No Facebook post. No phone call. Just one final, invisible door clicking shut. And I can't explain how light that felt. There's this myth that walking away from family is bitter. That it leaves a hole. That you'll always wonder if you made the right call. But sometimes, you walk away, and everything starts to bloom.